Imagine standing at the edge of a world where empires rise and fall like the waves of an unending sea, where faith guides armies and dynasties carve their destiny upon the sands of history. In this world of shifting power and ceaseless ambition, the Ottoman Empire emerged not as a fleeting force, but as a monumental presence that would endure for over 6 centuries, shaping the course of Islamic civilization and the fate of entire continents. It began humbly, with a small principality led by a determined chieftain named Osman, who was driven by a vision far greater than the modest lands he inherited. His descendants would not only expand their territory, but also assume the duty of protecting and spreading Islam, thereby turning the Ottomans into standard-bearers of the faith and guardians of its sacred cities. This was not merely a tale of battles and conquests, but one of ideas, devotion, and governance. Where the hearts of rulers were often as focused on spiritual legitimacy as they were on political power, the empire grew at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, bringing together diverse cultures, languages, and peoples under one banner of justice and law that drew heavily from Islamic teachings. From the beginning, the Ottomans understood that lasting power was built not solely on the sword, but on a foundation of belief, scholarship, and service to the Muslim community. The rise of the Ottoman Empire was remarkable not only for its speed, but also for its methodical nature. Osman and his successors were not reckless conquerors, but strategic visionaries who combined military strength with diplomacy and an ability to adapt to changing circumstances. As the Byzantine Empire weakened, the Ottomans seized the opportunity to establish themselves as the inheritors of authority in Anatolia and beyond. They presented themselves not only as warriors, but as just rulers committed to fairness and stability, which attracted the loyalty of Muslims and non-Muslims alike. With every expansion came new responsibilities, and the early sultans made great efforts to integrate Islamic principles into their governance. They drew upon the wisdom of scholars and jurists, embedding Islamic law into the administrative systems while allowing local customs to coexist. Where they did not contradict the core teachings of Islam, this approach fostered an environment where diverse communities could live under one rule without losing their identities. And it set the stage for centuries of relative harmony in regions often plagued by strife. One of the defining features of the Ottoman ascent was their understanding of symbolic legitimacy in Islam. When they captured important cities, especially those with spiritual significance, they did not simply seek political control. To frame themselves as defenders and promoters of the faith, the conquest of Bursa, for instance, evolved into more than a military victory. It became a spiritual and cultural hub for the Ottomans, where mosques, schools, and charitable institutions thrived. This combination of faith and governance created a unique identity that distinguished them from other contemporary powers. Their armies marched not only with the promise of land and wealth, but also with the motivation of serving a divine purpose. This sense of mission inspired loyalty among their followers and fear among their enemies. Even as they expanded into non-Muslim territories, the Ottomans gained respect for their relatively tolerant policies, which allowed Christians and Jews to practice their faiths under the protective framework of Islamic law, provided they honored their agreements and paid the required taxes. This policy was not merely pragmatic, but rooted in the Quranic principle of no compulsion in religion, and it gave the empire a moral weight that many of its rivals could not match. As the centuries turned into decades, the Ottoman Empire evolved. From a frontier principality into a grand Islamic caliphate, the pivotal moment came in 1453 when Sultan Mehmed II, later known as Mehmed the Conqueror, captured Constantinople. This was a turning point not just for the Ottomans, but for the entire Muslim world. The city, now known as Istanbul, became a jewel of Islamic civilization and a hub of learning, culture, and commerce. Mehmed's actions were deeply influenced by the prophetic tradition that praised the commander, an army who would one day conquer the great city of Byzantium. By fulfilling this vision, the Ottomans positioned themselves as rightful leaders of the Muslim world inheriting not only political power, but also spiritual prestige. This victory energized Islamic scholarship and architecture, leading to the construction of breathtaking mosques and schools that continue to inspire awe to this day. Also strengthened the Ottoman claim to the Caliphate, which they would formally assume after their conquest of Egypt in 1517, taking under their protection the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The sultans henceforth became both political rulers and spiritual leaders, with their authority recognized across much of the Muslim world. Yet the story of the Ottoman Empire is not simply one of unbroken success. It is a narrative filled with challenges, internal conflicts, and moments of significant transformation. The empire had to manage a vast and diverse population, facing pressures from both internal rivalries and powerful external foes. But through these trials, one principle remained at its core: the commitment to upholding Islamic values in governance and society. Whether through supporting scholars, preserving Islamic institutions, or ensuring the safe pilgrimage to Mecca, the Ottomans sought to serve as custodians of the faith. They balanced tradition and innovation, adopting new technologies when necessary, but always seeking to align their policies with the teachings of Islam. This gave them resilience in times of crisis and allowed them to endure far longer than many of their contemporaries. In reflecting on the early centuries of the Ottoman Empire, one sees a blend of ambition and devotion rarely matched in history. Their story is one of transformation from humble beginnings to becoming the heart of the Islamic world, guiding millions of believers and shaping the destiny of nations. It is a testament to how faith and governance can intertwine to create a legacy that even centuries later continues to influence the way Muslims view leadership, law, and society. The Ottomans did not simply build an empire of stone and steel. They built one of ideas, principles, and enduring spiritual significance. A legacy that echoes in the mosques they constructed, the laws they codified, and the memories of the people they ruled. And this is only the beginning of a journey that will take us deeper into their triumphs and tribulations, a story that intertwines the fate of an empire with the faith of millions. In the next stage of the Ottoman journey, we see a transformation from an empire finding its identity to one that stood proudly as the leading power of its time, shaping the political, cultural, and spiritual landscape of 3 continents. It was a period when the empire reached its most incredible heights and earned its place as a symbol of Islamic strength and unity. This era was defined by monumental achievements, remarkable leaders, and a vision that blended faith, justice, and ambition in equal measure. With the conquest of Constantinople behind them and the title of Caliphate in their hands, the Ottomans focused on consolidating their power and building an empire that could endure for generations. Their actions were driven by a deep sense of responsibility as leaders of the Muslim world, a duty to protect the faith, safeguard the holy cities, and ensure that the message of Islam was preserved and respected. The concept of service to the community was central, and the empire became known not only for its military strength, but also for its sophisticated governance and cultural brilliance. This period would witness rulers whose names would echo through history. Men who saw themselves not just as kings or conquerors, but as servants of a divine trust. Among these remarkable leaders was Sultan Sulayman, later known as Suleiman the Magnificent, who reigned from 1520 to 1566. His era marked the golden age of the Ottoman Empire when its territories stretched from the gates of Vienna in Europe to the deserts of Arabia, from the shores of North Africa to the heartlands of Mesopotamia. Under his rule, the empire was not merely powerful, but also deeply organized and refined. Sulayman's legacy was built upon 3 pillars: military strength, administrative excellence, and cultural patronage. He led campaigns that extended Ottoman influence across Europe and secured dominance in the Mediterranean and Red Sea, ensuring the protection of Muslim pilgrims and traders. Yet Sulayman's greatness was not limited to the battlefield. He was a keen supporter of Islamic scholarship and law, earning him the title the lawgiver among his people. He codified and refined the existing legal system, harmonizing it with Islamic principles so that justice could be applied fairly and efficiently across his vast domains. His efforts ensured that regardless of one's location within the empire, there was a shared sense of order rooted in faith and fairness. The cultural and intellectual advancements of this era were equally impressive. Sulayman's court became a beacon of Islamic art, poetry, and architecture. Magnificent mosques such as the famed Sultan Mosque in Istanbul rose as symbols of both spiritual devotion and artistic mastery. These structures were not merely places of worship, but centers of community life, learning, and charity. The Ottomans understood that the strength of an empire did not come solely from armies and wealth, but from nurturing the soul and intellect of its people. Scholars and artisans from across the Muslim world were welcomed, and their contributions enriched every facet of society, from calligraphy and textiles to medicine and astronomy. The flourishing of culture during this period was a testament to how faith and creativity could coexist and reinforce one another, creating a legacy that continues to draw admiration centuries later. This era also showcased the empire's commitment to its role as protector of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The Ottomans invested heavily in maintaining the pilgrimage routes, building infrastructure such as caravans, roads, and aqueducts to ensure that pilgrims from distant lands could travel safely and with dignity. The annual pilgrimage was not just a religious obligation, but also a symbol of unity among Muslims, and the empire took great pride in facilitating it. By safeguarding the Hajj and supporting scholars and caretakers in the holy cities, the Ottomans strengthened their spiritual legitimacy and fulfilled their role as custodians of Islam's sacred spaces. This dedication was widely respected across the Muslim world, reinforcing the empire's image as not just a political entity, but a spiritual beacon. Yet with great power came significant challenges, and the very vastness of the empire created strains. The Ottomans had to manage a diverse population that included Muslims, Christians, and Jews, each with different languages, cultures, and traditions. Their solution, known as the millet system, allowed each religious community a degree of autonomy under its leaders while remaining loyal to the Sultan. This arrangement reflected a profound understanding of Islamic principles of justice and coexistence, showing that strength did not require forced uniformity, but could thrive on respectful diversity. It was an approach that many empires in history failed to achieve, but for the Ottomans, it became a hallmark of their governance. As time passed, however, new challenges emerged that tested the resilience of even this mighty empire. Advances in military technology in Europe, the rise of powerful rival states, and internal struggles began to erode some of the Ottoman advantages. Trade routes shifted with the discovery of new sea passages, and the balance of economic power slowly tilted away from the traditional centers of the Islamic world. The empire still commanded respect and fear, but cracks began to form in its once unshakable foundations. This period did not mark an immediate decline, but rather a transition, as the Ottomans were forced to adapt to a rapidly changing world. They faced these challenges with a blend of innovation and tradition, striving to modernize aspects of their military and bureaucracy while upholding Islamic values. This delicate balance would prove challenging to maintain, and it became a central theme in the centuries that followed. Despite these growing pressures, the legacy of these centuries remained one of strength, faith, and cultural brilliance. The Ottomans had created an empire that was as much a spiritual project as it was a political one, serving as guardians of the faith and demonstrating how Islam could inspire just governance, artistic beauty, and societal harmony. Their achievements during these golden centuries are remembered not simply for their scale but for their soul, for the way they integrated devotion into every aspect of life. Even in times of hardship, the ideals they set forth protection of, the faithful, promotion of justice, and respect for knowledge would continue to guide Muslim thought and inspire future generations. The empire was more than an expression of temporal power. It was an enduring symbol of Islamic civilization at its zenith. Story of how one people guided by faith could shape the destiny of nations and leave a mark that time itself struggles to erase. The story of the Ottoman Empire now moves into an era where triumph and turbulence stood side by side, when the challenges of governing such vast lands began to test even the most significant achievements of its golden age. After centuries of expansion, and consolidation. The empire had become a symbol of power and faith, a guardian of Islamic heritage, and a beacon of unity for Muslims across continents. Yet history teaches that even the most formidable empires face moments when the currents of change demand adaptation. And for the Ottomans, these moments were as defining as their earlier victories. It was a time of both resilience and struggle, a period when leaders were faced with decisions that would shape the empire's future and its enduring legacy. As Europe began to surge forward with scientific advances, new forms of warfare, and global exploration, the Ottoman Empire found itself navigating a world that was transforming at a speed and in ways previously unimaginable. This was not merely a military or economic challenge. It was also an intellectual and cultural one, as it questioned how an empire rooted in centuries of tradition could thrive in a world that was no longer bound by the old order. One of the defining elements of this period was the growing tension between innovation and tradition. The Ottoman leadership, deeply committed to upholding Islamic principles, sought to preserve the values that had guided their ancestors, while also recognizing that the world beyond their borders was rapidly changing. The introduction of new technologies in warfare, particularly firearms and advanced artillery, had once been a significant Ottoman strength. By the 17th century, European states were surpassing them in both technique and production. The great naval powers of Spain, Portugal, and later Britain began to dominate the seas, redirecting global trade routes that had previously enriched Islamic lands. As the wealth of the world increasingly flowed along oceanic paths rather than through the old Silk Road, the Ottoman Empire faced an economic challenge that demanded new solutions. This was a moment when internal reforms became not just an option but a necessity, and various sultans sought to modernize their armies and bureaucracies to keep pace with the changing times. These reforms, however, often met resistance from entrenched groups who feared losing their privileges or saw change as a threat to the established social order. It was in these moments that the Ottomans' deep connection to their faith served as both an anchor and a compass, reminding leaders and citizens alike that any transformation must remain faithful to the moral principles of Islam. The religious and cultural heart of the empire continued to beat strongly during these times. Even as its political and military might was tested, Islamic scholarship remained a vibrant force, and mosques and schools continued to nurture generations of thinkers, jurists, and theologians. The devotion to preserving sacred knowledge was seen in the protection of religious texts, the continued support of scholars, and the maintenance of charitable foundations that provided for the poor, educated the young, and served travelers and pilgrims. Even as external pressures mounted, the Ottomans did not abandon their role as guardians of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, ensuring the safety and accessibility of the pilgrimage routes and preserving the dignity of the annual Hajj. These commitments reinforced the empire's spiritual legitimacy, reminded the Muslim world that despite shifting political fortunes, it remained devoted to its sacred responsibilities. Yet this period was not without its conflicts and setbacks. The empire faced a series of wars with rising European powers, including the Habsburgs and the Russian Empire, which strained resources and exposed vulnerabilities. The once unstoppable Ottoman armies found themselves facing fierce resistance and at times defeat. The loss of territories in Europe, particularly following significant battles, was a painful reality that compelled the Ottomans to reassess their strategies and priorities. These military challenges were compounded by internal unrest as different regions of the empire sometimes resisted central authority or sought greater autonomy. However, even in these moments of crisis, the Ottomans displayed remarkable endurance, holding together an empire that spanned continents and included an astonishing diversity of peoples and cultures. Their ability to govern such a vast and varied realm for so long is itself a testament to the resilience of their administrative systems and the strength of the ideals upon which the empire was built. As the centuries approached the dawn of modernity, the Ottoman Empire entered a phase often referred to as the Tanzimat, a period of reorganization and reform that aimed to revitalize the state. The goal was not to abandon Islamic values, but to align governance with the demands of a changing world while maintaining the moral and spiritual principles that defined Ottoman identity? These reforms touched nearly every aspect of life, from education and taxation to military service and legal rights. New schools were established to teach modern sciences, alongside traditional religious studies, and efforts were made to create more equitable systems of law and administration. This period also witnessed increased interaction with Europe, not only through conflict, but through diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. Such interactions brought both opportunities and challenges, introducing new ideas and technologies while also sparking debates about identity and sovereignty. For the Ottomans, the central question was how to integrate necessary innovation without losing the essence of who they were as a people and as an Islamic civilization. Despite these earnest efforts, the pressures on the empire continued to grow. The emergence of nationalist movements within the empire's diverse populations, combined with external interference from European powers, created a complex and often volatile situation. Yet through all of this, the Ottoman leadership remained committed to the core responsibility of protecting and promoting the faith. They continued to sponsor religious scholarship, maintain beautiful mosques and institutions, and uphold the pilgrimage routes that connected Muslims worldwide. Even in times of difficulty, their spiritual mission endured. And it is this aspect of the Ottoman legacy that continues to inspire respect and admiration. It reminds us that leadership in Islam is not merely about worldly power, but about service, justice, and the guardianship of that which is sacred. The later chapters of Ottoman history thus reveal a story not just of decline, as some have often oversimplified, but of adaptation, resilience, and enduring faith. The empire may have faced losses and challenges, but it also demonstrated how deeply held values can guide a people through the storms of history. In the end, the Ottomans left behind not only monuments of stone and marble, but also a legacy of spiritual leadership, cultural brilliance, and a model of governance that sought to harmonize tradition with progress. It is a story that continues to resonate today, offering lessons on how faith and history intertwine, how civilizations respond to change, and how the ideals of justice and service can endure even in the most trying of times. This era of the Ottoman Empire, marked by both challenge and perseverance, stands as a powerful chapter in the grand narrative of Islamic history, a testament to the enduring strength of a vision rooted in devotion and unity. The final century of the Ottoman Empire was a period of profound transformation where centuries of heritage, faith, and governance collided with the forces of modernity, nationalism, and unprecedented global change. It was a time of both remarkable perseverance and inevitable transition, where the empire's leaders grappled with challenges unlike any they had faced before. By this stage, the Ottomans had become not only a great Islamic power, but also a symbol of continuity for millions of Muslims who looked to them as the custodians of the holy cities and the bearers of the Caliphate, even as European powers expanded their influence and technology, redefined economies and warfare. The empire remained committed to its core mission to serve and protect the Muslim community, while preserving the legacy of Islamic governance that had been established over centuries. The story of this period is not one of sudden collapse, but of a gradual and complex struggle to remain relevant in a world that was rapidly shifting, often in directions that seemed to threaten the very fabric of traditional life. One of the most significant forces reshaping the empire during this era was the rise of nationalism among its diverse populations. For centuries, the Ottoman model of governance had allowed different religious and ethnic groups a degree of autonomy under the millet system, which respected their faith and customs while keeping loyalty to the Sultan and state. This arrangement worked effectively when identity was rooted primarily in religion and local community. However, as European concepts of nationalism spread into the Middle East and the Balkans, entire populations began to redefine themselves, not by their shared allegiance to the empire, but by their ethnic and linguistic ties. The empire suddenly found itself facing a wave of separatist movements from the Balkans to the Arab lands, each fueled by outside influence and promises of self-rule. These movements were often supported or manipulated by rival powers seeking to weaken the Ottoman Empire and expand their influence. Yet the Ottomans did not simply stand by. They worked to strengthen unity through reforms that aimed to create a common identity for all citizens, regardless of origin, under the banner of Ottomanism. This effort sought to inspire loyalty not only through religion, but also through shared citizenship and equality, introducing new legal systems, schools, and even representative institutions. During this turbulent time, the sultans themselves were often deeply engaged in reform and modernization efforts. Sultan Abdulhamid II, one of the most notable rulers of the late period, emphasized both spiritual leadership and practical governance. He was keenly aware that the empire's survival depended on strengthening ties among Muslims worldwide, and he actively promoted the idea of pan-Islamism, urging Muslims beyond Ottoman borders to see themselves as part of a global brotherhood united. Under the Caliphate, his reign saw significant investments in infrastructure such as railways, which not only enhanced trade and communication, but also made the pilgrimage to Mecca safer and more accessible than ever before. The famed Hijaz Railway connecting Damascus to Medina was more than a technological feat. It was a statement of devotion and a practical demonstration of the empire's continued role as guardian of Islam's most sacred places. Abdulhamid also supported religious schools and institutions, recognizing that in times of change, preserving the spiritual foundation of the people was essential. However, even as these initiatives showed promise, external pressures continued to mount. The empire became increasingly entangled in the politics of Europe, where alliances, rivalries, and wars often placed the Ottomans in precarious positions. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were marked by a series of conflicts, including wars in the Balkans and confrontations with powerful European states, each of which chipped away at Ottoman territory and influence. Economically, the empire struggled to keep pace with industrialized nations, and debts to foreign creditors limited its independence in decision-making. Socially, the shifting balance of power stirred unrest as different regions questioned their relationship with the central government and sought greater autonomy or outright independence. Yet through all this, the empire retained its spiritual significance. For countless Muslims, the Caliphate remained a symbol of unity, a reminder that despite political weakness, there was still a leadership that carried the mantle of serving Islam and protecting its holy sites. The First World War brought these tensions to a critical point. The Ottomans entered the war hoping to regain lost territories and assert their independence against encroaching powers. But the conflict instead accelerated their decline. The war drained resources, disrupted daily life, and brought foreign armies into key parts of the empire. Yet even in these dire times, there were moments of extraordinary resilience and faith. Ottoman soldiers, motivated not only by loyalty to their homeland, but also by a deep sense of religious duty, fought with remarkable courage in battles such as Gallipoli, where their determination became legendary. These moments showed that, even when facing overwhelming odds, the Ottoman spirit of service and sacrifice, rooted in centuries of Islamic devotion, still burned brightly. By the end of the war, however, the empire had been effectively dismantled by external powers, which divided its lands among themselves. For the first time in centuries, the Caliphate itself was at risk. When the new Republic of Turkey was established, under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, one of its most controversial decisions was the official abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. This marked not just the end of a dynasty, but the closure of an entire era of Islamic political leadership. For many Muslims across the world, it was a moment of sorrow and reflection, as the Caliphate had long symbolized unity and protection, even when political power had weakened. The end of the Ottoman era did not erase its contributions. However, it left behind a rich legacy of architecture, law, scholarship, and administration, as well as an enduring sense of what it meant to lead with an awareness of divine accountability. The final chapters of the Ottoman story remind us that empires are not only measured by the territories they hold or the armies they command, but by the values they embody and the memories they leave behind. The Ottomans demonstrated to the world how a state could draw upon faith as a source of strength, how diverse peoples could coexist under just governance, and how spiritual responsibilities could inform worldly affairs. Even in their decline, they demonstrated a remarkable resilience, seeking reform and adaptation rather than surrendering to despair. Their centuries-long guardianship of the holy cities, their support for scholarship and art, and their efforts to maintain unity in a time of fragmentation all speak to a vision that transcended mere politics. In this way, the Ottoman Empire's conclusion was not simply an ending, but a transformation, a passing of the torch to new generations of Muslims who would carry forward the principles of faith, justice, and service. The memory of the Ottomans continues to inspire reflection on the meaning of leadership and the enduring relationship between spiritual ideals and worldly power. The story of the Ottomans does not simply end with the fall of their empire. Instead, it transforms into a narrative of legacy, influence, and enduring inspiration. Long after the political structure of the empire was dissolved and its vast territories divided, the echoes of its cultural, spiritual, and administrative achievements continued to shape the Muslim world and beyond. This legacy is not confined to monuments and manuscripts, but lives on in the ideas of governance, art, faith, and identity that remain relevant even today. It is in these chapters that we see how the Ottoman heritage influenced emerging Muslim societies and inspired movements that sought to reconnect with the values of unity, justice, and service to humanity. One of the most visible aspects of the Ottoman legacy is its architectural and artistic achievements, which stand as living witnesses to centuries of faith-driven creativity, majestic mosques, intricate palaces, and sophisticated public buildings still dominate the skylines of former Ottoman cities. Structures such as the Blue Mosque and the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, the restored harem in Mecca, and countless caravans, bridges, and schools throughout the former empire reveal a mastery of design that combined functionality with spiritual symbolism. These were not mere buildings, but statements of devotion meant to uplift the soul and remind people of their connection to Allah. The use of calligraphy, omokria, tile work, and geometric patterns reflected an understanding that art itself could be an act of worship, a way of beautifying the world while adhering to Islamic principles of avoiding idolatry. Even centuries later, modern architects and artists continue to study Ottoman styles as exemplars of harmony between utility and beauty, between human ingenuity and divine inspiration. Equally important was the Ottoman legacy of education and scholarship. The empire had long invested in a system of schools, libraries, and madrasas that produced scholars, jurists, scientists, and poets. Even during times of military decline, the intellectual and religious life of the empire continued to remain vibrant. This tradition inspired later Muslim societies to value learning as an essential pillar of progress. After the empire's fall, many of its educational models were adopted or adapted by emerging states, and the writings of Ottoman scholars continued to be studied and appreciated. Their focus on both religious sciences and practical fields such as medicine, engineering, and law demonstrates a holistic approach to knowledge. It's one that resonates strongly with today's calls for balanced education that nurtures both spiritual and worldly success. The fall of the empire and the abolition of the Caliphate in 1924 created a spiritual and emotional vacuum for many Muslims. For centuries, the Caliphate had symbolized unity even when political realities were complicated, and its absence led to debates about how Muslims could maintain solidarity in a fragmented world. This moment inspired movements seeking to revive Islamic unity and governance based on divine guidance. While these movements took different forms and philosophies, many of them drew inspiration directly or indirectly from the Ottoman experience. The memory of an empire that had served as both political authority and guardian of the holy cities continued to influence discussions about leadership and identity in the Muslim world. The idea that leaders should be accountable not only to their people, but also to Allah, remains a deeply ingrained lesson from the Ottoman centuries. In addition to their spiritual and intellectual contributions, the Ottomans left behind sophisticated models of governance and administration that continue to inform political thought. Their systems of justice, taxation, and community autonomy demonstrated how diverse populations could coexist under a single authority. while retaining their cultural and religious identities. In an era where nations continue to grapple with questions of multiculturalism and pluralism, the Ottoman approach offers valuable insights. Their millet system, which respected the rights of different religious communities while ensuring loyalty to the central state, has been studied as an early form of balanced governance that avoided forced assimilation. Moreover, their insistence on codifying laws in harmony with Islamic principles serves as an enduring example of how faith-based values can guide practical governance without stifling social diversity. The Ottoman legacy also lives on in cultural memory and identity. For many nations that were once part of the empire, Ottoman history is a source of pride and debate, a reminder of times when Muslims wielded significant influence on a global scale. In regions such as the Balkans, North Africa, and the Middle East, Ottoman influences are still evident in language, cuisine, architecture, and social customs. Even when modern political borders and ideologies have shifted dramatically, these cultural connections remain, forming subtle threads that link different societies together. For Turkey itself, the successor state of the empire, Ottoman heritage has become a subject of renewed interest in recent decades, with scholars, artists, and leaders drawing upon the past to shape national identity and inform international diplomacy. This revival reflects a broader trend across the Muslim world, where people look back to periods of strength and unity for inspiration in facing contemporary challenges. Perhaps one of the most profound aspects of the Ottoman legacy is its moral and spiritual example. The sultans and scholars who served under the empire, despite their human flaws, were often driven by an awareness of divine accountability. They built mosques, schools, hospitals, and charitable institutions, not merely as displays of power but as acts of service, rooted in the belief that leadership is a trust AMA, and that those in authority will be answerable to Allah for how they care for their people. This concept remains deeply resonant today, especially in discussions about ethical leadership and governance. The Ottoman emphasis on justice, adult, compassion, rahmah, and community welfare, maslaha, reflects timeless Islamic values that transcend political systems and historical eras. Even in modern times, when political borders and global systems have undergone dramatic changes, the spirit of the Ottoman legacy continues to inspire new generations. Scholars study their archives for insights into diplomacy, trade, and administration. Artists find inspiration in their architecture and calligraphy. Social reformers and spiritual leaders draw upon their values to encourage unity, justice, and service. While the empire itself may have ended, story serves as a reminder that history is not only about what was lost, but also about what endures. The Ottoman experience demonstrates that when faith, governance, and culture are harmonized, they can create a civilization whose influence reaches far beyond its lifespan. The enduring influence of the Ottomans prompts us to reflect on how we perceive leadership, community, and our mutual obligations. Their story teaches that power without purpose fades quickly, but power guided by principles can leave a legacy that shapes hearts and minds for centuries. It reminds us that unity rooted in respect for diversity and guided by shared spiritual values is possible even in complex societies. And it offers a vision of how dedication to faith and service can withstand the tests of time. It's inspiring not only those who lived under the empire, but also countless others who generations later still look to it as an example of Islamic civilization at its finest.